Right, thanks, Arthur. The miracle of modern travel. You just get into that car, throw your stuff in the boot, away up the A9, follow the signpost, and you're here. How different when I came to the Highlands first, on an old bike, which I bought for 2 and 6. It was a real rough ride, but I got here. It was a place I'd always wanted to come to, but there was none of this that's around me now. What I saw was a lonely piece of wild country. But it was very different from another man who travelled here and had it even rougher, Bonnie Prince Charlie, who here fought the last major battle in Britain at Culloden.
Try to imagine the scene. From the right of the line, the Atholl Brigade, the Camerons, the Stuarts of Appin, the Frasers, Clan Catton, McLaughlin, the Farquharsons, Chisholm, the Clan Ranald, Kepach MacDonnell, Glengarry MacDonnell.
And if they had managed to make the Highland charge, I think they'd have broken through. It was the worst place possible for a Highland battle. The Highland army didn't have the equipment. They had very little good cavalry. They had a few worn-out horses. They didn't have the cannons. And worst of all, the troops were hungry. All they had was hope, because the Highland army had never lost a battle. But even today, there's a kind of atmosphere, a kind of gloomy atmosphere, maybe because of the trees. People who knew it long ago said it was the most impressive of battlefields because of the feeling of space and a kind of overwhelming melancholy. I think what you can say of Culloden is that it was a battle fought out of honour. Charlie, Bonnie Prince Charlie, was the son of a king. William Augustus was the son of a king. They were both the same age, 24 years of age when the campaign started, 25 when the battle was fought. And I suppose Charlie came to this stone in order to see how things were going. Try to visualize that hectic half an hour or so when the main battle was fought, with the cannons bursting, cavalry charging, men falling dead, and the prince, when he saw that all was lost, he headed away with 1 or 2 others towards the Nairn Valley, riding towards the west to the rough bounds of Knoydart. Gothic. And when the prince saw this house, I imagine he was gey pleased, because he'd been in the saddle for something like 25 miles, and he knew in that house he might get some refreshment and maybe some news as well, because Lord Lovat was in hiding there. If it's true that Lovat said to the prince to remember his ancestor, Bruce, who had fought 11 times before he won independence for Scotland at the 12th attempt, then it must have been cold comfort for the prince riding through this bleak country that day of April. It had been impressed upon him that he would have to go west. The army was broken up. They didn't even have a rendezvous. And I believe he mingled tears with his wine. And then apparently there was news that some dragoons were on their way, so that you leave in a hurry. From the heights, the prince's party swept down to the top of Loch Ness at Fort Augustus. And then they turned away round Lahoich for Invergarry Castle. Standing in the Raven's Rock, they expected to find something there, maybe food, shelter, fire, get a rest. But instead they found the place completely deserted. Nothing. 2 o'clock in the morning, they must have been utterly weary after 16 hours in the saddle. And at breakfast time they had a stroke of luck. They had a wee man with them called Ned Burke, a man from North Uist, and he went down to the water, found 2 salmon in a stake net, so that a great boil up, and with the bannocks, a good breakfast. And they rested here until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then set off down the western side of Loch Lochy. to turn up towards Loch-Arkaig through the dark mile. They went riding up along that long loch, 12 miles of narrow water, but at the head of the dark mile is Achnacary House, and that was the house of Lochiel. And there is a Lochiel still living there, Sir Donald Cameron of Lochiel. And without Cameron of Lochiel, there would have been no Jacobite rising.
He, unfortunately, was exiled with Prince Charlie, and so never came back after 1746. But as you say, there are a lot of stories about him which have been handed down from generation to generation, or which in our family archives. For example, we have just outside this window the Beech Avenue, which consists of beeches which the gentle Lochiel, as he was known, was going to use to plant an avenue towards Fort William. Well, when he heard Prince Charlie landed, he shooked in these young beeches into a trench alongside the river. And his intention then was to tell the prince that there was no future for him, as he had no arms, no men, no money, and that he should go back and wait till he had better resources for invading the country. But of course he was won over, as everyone knows, by the charm of Prince Charlie and by the duty he felt towards his house, and never came back. So these trees have grown up in this trench in the way that he was planted them then. Therefore they're very close together. They're about 250 years old. Some of them have blown down, but they're there to this day as the trees which he himself had put in 1745. We do treasure the relics we have of the gentle Lochiel and of his time. We've got a lovely sword made by the best sword maker of his time, Walter Allen of Stirling. We've got his pistol made by a very good pistol maker, Campbell of Doon. We've got his targe, as you say, with bullet holes in it, with Fearguard, Honour the King, on the targe. We've got various other relics of him, snuff mulls and that sort of thing. We've got a very nice gun made in France belonging to Prince Charles himself, which was left to my grandfather by Lord Elcho. We treasure all these relics, and I wish there were more. And I like to think that his peaceful exploits are also remembered by his descendants. There was a story about how when the Highland Army was coming back from Glasgow, and Prince Charlie demanded clothes and money and so on from the city, and they were very loath to give it to them. And so Prince Charlie said, "We'll sack the city." And Lochiel, true to his more kindly disposition, prevented the city from being sacked, persuaded Prince Charlie not to sack them. And as a tribute to him for saving the city, they've said that the bells of the toll booth will be rung whenever Lochiel or his descendants came to the city of Glasgow. And they've been rung to this day, 3 times in my own lifetime they've been rung, in memory of his saving the city from being sacked. My great ambition is to retain as much of the Cameron lands as possible, and certainly this house and this part of the lands to be a focus for the clan, to be a place where they can come and call on their chief, where they can come and look and see where their ancestors lived, to be a centre for the clan throughout the world. I think it's terribly important. So my great ambition, and my son feels the same way, is to retain this place as the centre of the clan lands. And I feel to be Lochiel, be the 19th, to be the 26th chief of the clan. Gentle Lochiel was the 19th. I'm the 26th chief of the clan. It's a great responsibility, a great privilege, and something one is very proud of.
It's good to know that Loch-Arkaig and so much of the wild Cameron lands are still under Lochiel, himself a distinguished soldier, and much loved in the Highlands, as was the gentle Lochiel. And I'm going to spend the night at the head of Loch-Arkaig, as the Prince did. It was from here he began his epic mountain marches to outwit the enemy, first by Glen Peen to reach Lochmora, then Glen Beesdale to a cave in the sea, a journey seldom walked by anyone to this day, and certainly never filmed before. Aye, this is all that remains of the house of Donald Cameron of Kinloch-Arkaig. And what excitement there must have been that night when he heard the sound of voices, the sound of horses. The party that came in were 4 very weary men, tired out. No wonder, 48 hours after Culloden, here was the Prince and 3 companions. And of course they were hoping that they might hear news of what had happened at Culloden. Donald Cameron didn't even know that Culloden had been fought and was a disaster, and the Prince was on his way to escape somewhere. Still, the Prince waited all next day, hoping for news that the clans had rallied and that the fight could be carried on. But the Prince had given no orders for a rendezvous point, so he had no way of contacting them. Some of the army were at Ruthven Barracks away down on Badenoch. So I think it was then the Prince made his decision that he would have to clear out quickly. But the only way out was through the rough bounds of Moidart to the west. I first came to this country when I was a boy of 16. In one way I was like Prince Charlie. I too was looking for an escape from the tenements of Glasgow, and I certainly found it here.
Moidart, a wild country between Loch Nevis and Loch Huron. But for me, the real delight was that the country was absolutely empty. I craved it. I didn't have any kind of insight into history at all. This was the world I wanted, just to be, I suppose, an animal living in a marvellous world. In fact, I described myself later as all body and no brains. A couple of magnificent wild goats up there, real hairy jobs with tremendous sweat-backed horns. Well, it's the kind of thing you expect to find in a place like this, although usually when it's just as wet as this, the wild goat doesn't do so well. And this is one of the wettest parts of Scotland. No wonder the Prince's party said it was the cruellest road they'd ever seen below the wildest peaks in Scotland. I think he had a point there. Anyhow, I got to know a climbing man, this butcher friend of mine, Matt Forrester. Oh, he seemed to me to have the wisdom of the ages. He was older than me, I think he'd be 19. And Matt seemed to have walked everywhere. Like me, he'd taken to the hills by himself. He had been to Moidart too. And it was he who gradually unfolded to me the thing that was missing in my life, namely, any kind of interpretation of the landscape. And once we did a trip from Glenfinnan together, right over the hills and out by Lochar-Keig, and it was then when he started to talk to me about the events of the 45, brought home that Charlie virtually was the first mountaineer to explore this country. I had never thought of the Prince as a mountaineer, but the more I read about the Prince, I thought, well, he's an odd character right enough. Matt, incidentally, didn't like him much. He thought he was a right scunner.
Well, Matt was a real outdoor type. He couldn't be doing with any kind of romantic nonsense like Bonnie Charlie's New Awa and all that stuff.
A sudden change of character in the glen. It's closing in. It was wide and boggy to begin with. Now it looks firmer, steeper and rockier. So I saw Charlie as something rather different from Matt. And I believe that when Charlie came here first, he was rather like me when I came here first, in that he didn't have much imagination. He accepted whatever he found. After all, look at the Prince, arriving in Scotland with only 7 men, no money, very little in the way of arms and ammunition. And yet he managed to raise an army of wild clansmen who couldn't agree with each other, but they followed him. And he virtually walked through Scotland, went into England and marched right down to Derby. And then on retreat, they never lost a battle. The Highlanders did marvellously, despite the fact that I suppose they were ill-disciplined and everything else. And it was the events following Culloden, once that disastrous battle had taken place, and Cumberland had it his own way, and no doubt the Highlanders were seen as a 5th column, and that the only good Highlander was a dead one. So that while Charlie was walking through this country, wounded men were being rounded up in the field of Culloden and spiked to death. People were pulled out of fields and shot. Women were raped. Houses were burned. The idea was to teach the Highlanders a lesson. So I started to look at this country a different way. When I saw these ruins, I thought of the people who lived here and who managed to win a living from this wildest country, wettest country in Scotland. herding their black cattle, growing a little oats to keep them. It must have been a very, very hard life indeed, and this is, I think, what made them great soldiers. Well, this is worth the walk. Lochan, Lewin and Saggart. It means the loch of the priest's leap, but nobody knows who the priest was. Fine big waterfall on that side. And apparently there's no easy way here, but I know there's a path on the left-hand side. And if it was getting dark when the prince was here, I can understand why he felt it such a terrible road, because he left the head of Kinlochharkeg at 5 o'clock at night, so it'd be getting on by the time he got here. Well, this is one striking scene. We've seen how the valley narrowed. Now it's broad for a wee bit, and it's narrowing again, I can see. And when I came to the hills first, I thought of all this as ancient history. In fact, I thought of the First World War as ancient history. I was only 16 when I started going to the hills in real earnest. My father was killed in 1916. But 1916 seemed to me as remote as the Ice Age away. In fact, when my mother used to say, "I hope you'll never be a soldier," I tended to think she had an awful long memory, you know. That's the funny thing, as you get older, history seems to draw closer. But it was never more so than one day with my pal Matt, when we met an old man who started telling us about his folks. He said I could remember his father telling him about a granduncle who had fought with a prince at Culloden, and he regaled us with details of the battle, as if he'd actually seen it himself. It made a great impression on me because suddenly I realised that it hadn't happened all that long ago. That was really thrilling across the steep hillside there. Quite moody too, because the day's changed a bit since the morning. Began a bit too bright. Now it's darkened down a bit, and something ahead looks very good because the traverse is taking me into a wee corrie. It's marked on the map, Corrie Vey. So I'll be dropping into that and through the narrows and soon in the crest of the pass. And if anything came out of the disaster of Culloden, that something was the loyalty of the Highlanders. The fact that they gave their all to the prince. The prince escaped, but they didn't. They were the victims ever afterwards. In fact, it was only the ability of the Highlandmen as soldiers that 40 years after Culloden made them so valuable, because then they were integrated into the Highland regiments and won honours in every battlefield that was ever fought. And it was then the government started to think in terms of not getting rid of the Highlanders, but trying to keep them in the Highlands. The Caledonian Canal was built to teach them the habits of industry. What an idea. Leisure is seen as a very desirable thing. The Highlanders knew it a long time ago. That was the thing they valued more than anything. Freedom was life itself to them. I started life in a grocer's shop, born a man and died a grocer. My ambition was to get away from it, to break it and find the freedom of these hills. And I'm glad I did it. Oh, well, I wonder how Charlie was feeling. That was really his introduction to walking in Scotland. He'd ridden a horse to Kinlochharkeg, then he started on foot through Glen Pean, through the bogs, and then through the... And I think I know how he must have felt when he got here. Coming through the boulders, you've got to dodge obstacles, climbing up through fallen rocks, then up onto grassy spurs, and always the ridge is still ahead of you. And then at the very notch in the pass, he would start going downhill for the first time, because he had to come down to the edge of Loch Morar, and then there's a very savage bit of country, all peat hags and wee lochans, to get to Meable. And he spent the night, it said, in a shield hut there, absolutely exhausted, the most tired he'd ever been in his life. And then it was a question of up the next day and crossing the spur again to get down to the shores of Loch na Ua, where he had first landed in Scotland. And from the foot of Glen Beesdale he came to Borrowdale House, a key point. He spent the night there, but it was the last time he was to stay there, because the house was destroyed. And when he came back again to carry on the flight This is where he to make do with what was here. And it's not very much, but what a hideout. I could hardly find it when I came. I had to look hard on the rocks. I saw the faint traces of a path, climbed up through the hole, dropped into this cavern, and you could shelter at least 10 men. Lord Lovat had reminded Bonnie Prince Charlie at Gorthlec that his great ancestor Robert the Bruce had failed 11 times before he won independence for Scotland. And that cave was full of spiders. Strange. But I think you couldn't pick a better cave, because from the mouth of it you get that marvellous view right over Loch Naua. But Charlie had a good reason for wanting away in a hurry, I think. It was, I feel, essential for him to save his face. Things had gone so far wrong with him, and I think he felt if he got away, he might come back. Whereas if he stayed, all might have been lost. I know this much, he must have regretted that particular night of departure, because it was a stormy night. They had an 8-oared open boat, and before the Prince was round into Arisaig Bay, he was dying to get back ashore, but it was too late by that time. They were on their way to cast up where they could. It happened to have been Becula. And it was from a cave in Borrowdale. The Prince came here on the 18th of July, back to the mainland again after 2 months in the Hebrides, where he didn't get a ship for France. And this is what he saw when he came here. He was looking down on the head of Glen Shiel at Glenfinnan, where 11 months earlier the clans had rallied to march on London. But this time there was something very ominous. Everywhere were redcoats searching for him, and they knew he was here. He'd been spotted, they'd been trying to trace his movements, and he'd only one way of escape, and that was through the high peaks of Knoydart. And as the redcoats drew nearer, they knew they would have to move up to 3,000 feet above Glen Peen. And it was there they found the man who would take them through Knoydart, none other than Donald Cameron of Glen Peen. And he had been watching the redcoats in Glen Peen, and he knew if they lay up long enough, they could slip through, cross into the next glen, Glen Desiree, climb over a high ridge down to Loch Cuich, another ridge, and they were at Loch Hourn. And the navy who'd been blockading all the way from Loch Hourn to Glen Nevis, and the soldiers who were all the way to the east, were outwitted by the skill of the few Highlandmen who were passing the Prince on from glen to glen. And the examples of loyalty that came to the Prince, you know, that was one of the great things of this campaign. It showed the kind of men that the Highlanders were. There was one, for example, MacIan, who befriended the Prince, and he was hanged for stealing a cow, which he needed for survival, and yet he could have shot the Prince and got a reward of £30,000. When I first came to the Highlands in the 1930s, finding the glens, I hardly saw anybody. I used to take my holidays in May. Time I loved, everything was just at its peak. And when you came through the glens, everybody was pleased to see you, especially in the remote houses. In fact, it was hard to camp because you were always being invited into houses. If you were away in the hill, with a wee plate of scones or something when you came back, a jug of milk or a few eggs. And by the time I was about 19 or 20, practically every friend I had lived in a wild part of the Highlands. And the Highlands became really a part of my life, although I lived in Glasgow. Well, time passed after the war. Suddenly everybody started to get richer. Motor cars became common currency amongst the ordinary working folk. Everybody discovered the Highlands. And today, more and more people want to live in the Highlands. Every summer the roads are jammed. And nowadays I find that I use my knowledge of the Highlands to find the Highlands as I used to know them. And these secret places, like the rough bounds of Knoydart, which will always appeal to me, have a melancholy about them. The ghosts of history walk there. In some ways, the ghosts of my own history too, because most of the friends that I made in these early days are dead. And they were the ones, in some ways, who put this country in real perspective for me. So I am away for a few more days into the rough bounds of Noida.